live and breathe.
Okay, so first of all, Rob Marshall, I know he movie proposed to you.
He did.
And I want to know if you know that he proposed to everybody else. He even proposed to
What?
Meryl via email. He didn't even give her a formal proposal, and apparently she just went, yes, 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 yes. How do you feel about that?
I feel that my proposal was definitely the most charged and full of passion. I'm just going to say, you know, Meryl got an email. I got a full phone call.
Okay.
So I don't want to be competitive with Meryl.
But a phone call's better than an email.
Listen, I don't want to like say it's not for me to say, but like, no. And I was the first proposal. I will be his first and only wife.
You will always be the first. You will always be the first. I'm gonna go in with a zinger here.
Oh God.
There's this saying where you look in the mirror and you say practically perfect in the film. And then there's another saying in the film called Kerflooey, which means kind of the opposite. Everything's falling apart. Tell me something about yourself that is practically perfect and something that is Kerflooey.
I'm not practically perfect. Who is? That's just for her. I'm not practically perfect. Kerflooey is much more sort of on par with how I operate. Falling apart at the seams. I mean, if I had to drive anywhere without Google Maps,
a mess.
Would go Kerflooey.
Oh, that was Meryl.
Right?
That what did you just pull out there?
God knows.
So I know your husband John cried
Yes.
when he sat through the film.
Yes, yes.
There's a whole theme because Rob apparently cried. Lynn cried as a child. He couldn't get through the original.
Don't we like men who cry?
We personally love it. I've never found one. But
don't say that.
But have you cried? And I want to know if when John cried, please tell me you used that line. Well, that's enough of that.
No. Can you imagine how cold that would be? I watched it by myself the first time, and I smiled and laughed and sort of cried most of the way through it. But then when Rob came in after I'd finished watching it, and that was when I couldn't speak. I was sort of, it was like that ugly...
Oh, I love the ugly cry.
Scream cry?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like that.
When you start to suck it in.
It was like, it was bad. It was
my
not,
gosh.
it was not, I couldn't pull it together. It was a lot.
How'd you do that?
Do what?
I'm just gonna go in with a zinger, okay? So there's a saying, or a couple of sayings or phrases in the movie. One of them is practically perfect, and one of them is Kerflooey, which is the total opposite. I want to know what about you is practically perfect, and what is Kerflooey?
There's very little about me that is practically perfect.
I would beg to differ.
The only talent I have that is on display in this movie that I'm actually very good at is sliding down banisters on my butt. And I got to do it for 1 second in this movie, and I'm very proud of that. Everything else is Kerflooey on its way to practically perfect and took a lot of hard work.
Oh, pish posh, I totally disagree with you about that one. So I know as a kid, you loved this movie, but you could only get to Feed the Birds and then you would start to cry.
Feed the Bird messed me up, man.
And there's a little reference to Feed the Birds in the Dick Van Dyke scene. Did you cry when you watched this film? Have you cried every time? All of the 3 times you've seen it, have you cried?
Oh, listen, I'm a terrible judge of that. I'm an easy cry.
Me too.
But really, honestly, what was magical about that sequence when we shot Dick Van Dyke's monologue, where, as you mentioned, the orchestration sort of very subtly quotes Feed the Birds, he finished the monologue, and then there was this sort of silence, and no one knew what to do, and it's because Rob was so overcome that he couldn't say cut. And it was the first time he really lost it on set. So we were all a wreck after that.
So makeup had a great time with you guys after that.
Yeah.
So I know you've also said that you love The Little Mermaid and you love Sebastian the Crab. Yeah. And Under the Sea. And I wonder if there's...
Best portrayal of a composer in cinema history. It's like Amadeus and Sebastian the Crab.
Oh my gosh. Did you draw any influence from Sebastian or anywhere else random for this role as a lamplighter?
You know, my biggest sort of research assistant on this was my son. He was 2 going on 3. And really what this movie is about is that we're born with sort of limitless imagination, and then we forget as we get older. And I had a kid who was firmly in that. You could hand him a stick and he would dance to Step in Time for an hour on his own. And so he was my, anytime I needed to find that innocence, I had an expert in my home.
Blind, Tyson got caught on a nanny.
Mary
Poppins, you came back.
You seem hardly to have aged at all.
Really? One never discusses a woman's age, Michael. Would have hoped I taught you better.
So, congratulations on an amazing film. There's one thing that I'm noticing when I hear people talk about this film, whether they're talking about this one or the original, it's tears. There is a through line where Rob Marshall, I think it was the first movie he ever saw, and he cried. I don't think Lynn said he could get through the first one without crying. And then you apparently made John Krasinski cry when he watched the film for the first time. It was something with your scene that made him cry, and then he couldn't stop crying throughout. Have you guys kept on the tradition? Have you cried watching any of them, and sort of like what the original meant to you?
No.
You haven't cried?
No, I haven't cried, but I have been delighted to have had an opportunity to watch the first film again, which I hadn't seen since I was 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But when I was 3 or 4, it was my world. You know, I
Yes.
was obsessed with it. So, but I felt more as just really a sense of being enchanted again and delighted, and almost like I was 3 or 4 again.
And how did you feel about making John Krasinski cry throughout?
Well, that's sweet, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's nice. But I think it's because he's a new dad.
Yeah.
So it's touching
Yeah.
for him.
What
this
about you,
film.
Emily?
Well, yeah, it's very. The first one was very touching, seeing these kind of grown-up oddball parents who'd been so sort of distant from their children and quite absent, suddenly finding joy in them, and that was very moving. And that "Let's Go Fly a Kite" number at the end was, even as a child, I mean, I wasn't necessarily crying, but I remember feeling like, oh my God, that's so sweet, you know. And in this movie, it's very emotional because it's about grief. It's about the loss of a mother and a wife, Michael's wife, and has just recently died before the movie begins. And so there's a lot that touches on things that really make you feel sad. Mm-hmm. And the way that I think Rob has directed it, where he doesn't sort of lay on the emotion. He doesn't sit on the emotion too much. He doesn't overdo it.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to be brave in the face of this tragedy, including the children. And that really makes you cry. When you see children trying to be brave about their own mother dying, you're just like, oh my goodness, help.
So Rob famously proposed to Emily, but movie proposed when he brought the idea of doing Mary Poppins. Did you get a proposal from Rob, or how are you brought on board officially?
I met him in his apartment in New York, and he pitched the movie to me. I hadn't seen a script, but he just told me the story and told me that he wanted to make a movie that started off where you met the grown-up Banks children.
So he proposed to you too?
In a way, and anyway, he really won me over. I said yes, immediately accepted his proposal.
Did you get proposed to as well?
Well, I guess a kind of proposal, yeah. He was extremely charming and very...
You would say yes to
You
Robert
would say
Diaz
yes.
to marry you. I mean, he's
Yes.
somebody that
He
you would
showers you with
follow
love.
him into battle. He'd do anything
Yeah.
for him. He's that kind of person.
Yeah. And then last question. There's a couple of phrases or words in the movie. Practically perfect is one of them, and Kerflooey is another, and they're both sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum. Can you tell me either a practically perfect moment you had on set, or one that just went Kerflooey because you had so much, there's so much to coordinate on set?
Well, practically perfect was I mean, more than perfect actually was Dick Van Dyke when he came on and delivered this just extraordinary performance. And none of us, we'd all rehearsed with each other for weeks on end and hadn't, and had all seen each other perform. But he had just arrived and just literally arrived, walked onto the set, got up onto a table and did a dance, and then sat down and delivered this perfect monologue. And our jaws were all on the floor. It was amazing and beautiful, and I mean, not practically perfect, it was perfect. And
Beyond perfect.
Yeah, beyond perfect.
I think my first day of filming was a bit Kerflooey.
Okay.
Do you remember? I hate first days.
What
And
was
it's
the
really
first day?
hard.
It was
And we
when we were
started
leaving
right
the
at the end.
house.
Yeah, we
Yes.
started with a scene right near the end of the film.
Yeah, which
And
is
even though we'd
always-
had like lots of rehearsals, it all felt a bit like, oh, this isn't a good start. Do you remember? We forget now.
Yes.
But then it did go uphill and
Yes.
it got practically perfect.
So you've been off filling the children's heads with stuff and nonsense.
You've forgotten what it's like to be a child.
So first of all, I'm going to call you out a little bit because Emily said that you movie proposed to her when you told her about this film. But I'm also hearing that you proposed to Ben, you proposed to Emily, you proposed to Lynn. So are you changing up the proposal every time? And how do you movie propose?
That's such a great question. Listen, I have the greatest group of actors in this film, and it was such a thrill for them all to say yes. It's all my first choices,
Wow.
I mean, I saw no one else for these roles but these great actors. And so I guess I hope that they felt when I movie proposed to them my love of the first film, my great desire to make this film have the same spirit but also create something completely new and original at the same time.
Yeah.
And I hope they felt the love that I feel for their work, and that I honestly believed in my deepest heart that they could embody these characters with such passion and such talent. They're all so extraordinary. And I think, that's the hope that, that they'll say yes to that proposal. And
So you said you got a yes every single time. You've got a great track record.
I did. I mean, I even got, here's my favorite from Meryl Streep. I actually emailed her because I know her well, having worked with her on Into the Woods. I said, would you ever consider blah, 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 blah? And this is what she wrote. Yes, 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 yes. So that was a few yeses.
Oh my gosh, getting one yes from Meryl would be amazing, but all of those are... So talking about the original, I know it was the first movie you ever saw as a child,
It
and
was.
you cried. Then there's a theme of tears. John Krasinski cried when he saw it. Lynn said he couldn't get through the original without crying. I've seen it 3 times. I've cried every single time.
Wow.
Talk to me about your tears.
I find it, you know what, I just watched it again at the premiere in LA. It was our big world premiere. It was a huge screen at the Dolby Theater, and I was sitting with, this extraordinary audience who was just loving it and giving it such, I don't know, all of their heart watching it. I felt it in the audience, and it's just an emotional movie. It's emotional for people who know the first film. I think you know what I mean, because there's a nostalgia or something. That's what I feel, but I cry just as much out of joy.
That's what it is, though. It's not ugly tears.
No,
it's not ugly crying.
It's sort of like a joyous feeling. It's like just remembering your childhood and remembering that there's wonder in the world. It's somehow very deep.
Yeah. Well, talking about, you paid such homage to the original while making it fresh, and there's so many elements I wish I had time to ask you about. But I know you did hand-drawn animation. You brought animators out of retirement for
Yes.
that. I'm wondering about the sound, too, because like in the old school animation, you had to use random things. You didn't have the technology. Did you do that with the sound as well?
Well,
Did you
no, I
find-
had the greatest, most sophisticated sound department, but I also wanted them to understand that I wanted things that didn't seem artificial. Do you know what I mean? I wanted it all to feel very organic coming from the story. And I wanted to create 2 worlds, a very real London, and then sort of these fantasias, That was so important for
Thank
me.
you for that fantasia.
I mean, it's just because you just want to be
Yeah.
lifted, and we wanted to find different worlds, like underwater. What's that sound like? What does it sound like inside a china bowl, for that whole sequence? What are these? And I want you to feel it viscerally, not just sort of seeing it, but feel it, hear it, everything.
Is there any, things are obviously on the page and you bring on these great actors, but is there any specific, either with Lynn, any of the actors, that you went, wow, I didn't expect that?
I remember there was a hilarious moment from Emily Blunt where she just made up a line that's in the film. It's one of my favorite lines in the film.
That's enough of that?
That's it. She's watching Jack and Jane ride off, which she's kind of like sort of arranged to make sure that they meet, and she's so happy with it. And you see her kind of loving that. And then she changes like Mary Poppins so quick, and she goes, well, that's enough of that. And she walks off. And it's so funny, and it's so Emily. Emily has such a great sense. And it was so, what I love about actors is when they actually own the role. It's like their role. And so she found these moments and found that great, hilarious line.
Wow, I absolutely love that. And the children.
How
were
did you know
amazing.
that? I love that you knew that.
Oh, I did my research. The children that you cast
Yes.
was so spectacular.
Oh,
There's
thank
a lot
you
of
for saying
children in
that.
films, and you really took the time to make me care about them.
Oh, wow.
So the casting process, did you have them read all together?
You know what? We saw hundreds
Yeah.
and hundreds of kids in England. And by the end, we were sort of whittling it down, and I wanted to see how they would work together. So yes, by the end, we had the 3 of them together and read together. And there was a magic. I felt they were brother and sister. And you know why? Because they're real kids. They're not sort of showbiz kids. I really was so concerned that we didn't do that. I wanted to create a real family with, the brilliant Ben Whishaw as the father, and these three great children, and of course Emily Mortimer, the fabulous Emily Mortimer as their Aunt Jane. And I wanted to feel like it was a real family that you really care about. And Julie Walters, of course, the great Julie Walters as the housekeeper Ellen, like a real family that we really believe in.